My husband drained our daughter's college fund and vanished with his mistress. I was devastated, until our 12-year-old smirked and said, "Mom, don't worry, I handled it." Days later, he called screaming after discovering it. But before we continue, if you love stories like this, hit that subscribe button so you'll always be the first to know when a new one drops. It was supposed to be an ordinary Thursday, the kind of uneventful day you'd forget by next week. But instead, it became the moment everything in my life unraveled. I woke up to the quiet hum of our house, the kettle whistling as usual, and the scent of toast drifting in from the kitchen. I assumed my husband Mark was already off to work, but something felt different, a subtle emptiness in the air. As I poured my coffee, my phone vibrated with a flurry of notifications. At first, I ignored them, thinking it was just another school reminder or a neighbor's message. But when I finally checked, my heart plummeted. My banking app showed a series of transactions I hadn't authorized. Thousands of dollars drained from our savings account and, worse, every penny from the college fund we'd started the week our daughter Ava was born. That fund was our promise to her, a future secured, a dream protected. In one morning, it was gone. Confused, I tried calling Mark, but his phone rang once and went straight to voicemail. That's when I noticed the note on the kitchen counter, just a folded piece of paper sitting by the fruit bowl. My hands shook as I opened it. The words were hastily scribbled. "I'm sorry. Don't try to find me. It's better this way." That was it. 13 years of marriage, reduced to a few lines. My chest tightened and I stumbled to a chair, struggling to breathe. It felt impossible to process. Was this a prank? Was he really gone? I rushed to our closet, pulling open drawers and flinging clothes aside. His side was empty, the suitcases missing. Reality hit me all at once. My husband had left. The next hours blurred together. I called his office. He hadn't shown up. I called his sister. She hadn't heard from him in days. Panic gnawed at me, twisting my insides. My mind raced through every memory, every recent conversation, searching for clues I'd missed. Then my phone chimed again. This time it was a message from an unknown number, but I recognized the area code. "He's with me now. Don't bother looking. Take care of your daughter." The signature was just an emoji, a red lipstick kiss. I felt dizzy, bile rising in my throat. Of course, the whispers I'd ignored for months about his late nights, the work trips, the way he guarded his phone, they all made sense now. The betrayal was complete and total. I wanted to scream, to smash something, to wake up and find it all a nightmare. But as I staggered into Ava's room, I saw her sitting on the bed, hugging her knees, her wide eyes glistening with tears she was trying not to let fall. She looked so small, so fragile, and I broke inside all over again. How was I supposed to explain to her that her father was gone, that the college dreams we'd built together were just a memory now? I wanted to protect her, to shield her from the pain, but there was nowhere left to hide. I sat down beside her, reaching for her hand, not sure what to say or do. The only thing I knew for certain in that moment was that our lives would never be the same. The world I'd trusted, the partner I'd chosen, had shattered our family without a second thought. And in the hollow silence that followed, I could only wonder how we would ever find a way back. The days that followed felt endless, a relentless parade of empty hours where each breath seemed heavier than the last. I barely ate, unable to choke down food past the knot in my throat. Sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, the images of Mark's betrayal replayed in my mind, a looping nightmare I couldn't escape. My daughter Ava moved through the house like a ghost, the spark in her eyes dimmed by confusion and pain. Every sound, the doorbell, the buzz of my phone, sent my heart lurching in hope that it was him returning, or in dread that there would be more bad news. I tried to hold myself together for Ava, but inside I was unraveling, piece by piece. I spent hours on the phone with the bank, explaining what had happened, desperate for some kind of miracle. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the representative said with a practiced calm that made me want to scream, "but the transfers were authorized with your husband's credentials. Unless you file a police report, there's little we can do." The idea of involving the police made my skin crawl. It felt too public, too humiliating, like airing the collapse of my family to the world. I cried in the shower so Ava wouldn't hear. I wept over old photos, vacations, birthdays, our wedding day, moments that now felt like cruel jokes. The worst part wasn't just losing the money or the man I thought I knew. It was the weight of helplessness. I was a mother, meant to be strong, to provide, to shield my child from darkness. Yet I couldn't even protect her from her own father. Friends reached out, their voices full of sympathy, but their words were empty. "You'll get through this," they said. "You're strong." But I didn't feel strong. I felt utterly defeated. At night, I'd find myself staring at the ceiling, tracing cracks in the plaster, searching for reasons. Had I missed the signs? Should I have questioned him sooner? Was there something I could have done differently to stop him? The guilt clawed at me, relentless and sharp. I knew that the college fund wasn't just money. It was possibility, hope, the foundation of Ava's future. Every penny in that account had come from sacrifice. We skipped vacations, I took on extra shifts, and Mark, at least until now, had always insisted he was investing in our family. All of it gone, swept away by his selfishness and deceit. Ava barely spoke those first days. When she did, her voice was so small it hurt to hear. "Will Dad come back?" she whispered once, her eyes rimmed red from crying. I didn't have the answer. I told her I loved her, that we'd figure it out, but the words felt thin. She didn't ask about the money. Maybe she was too young to understand what had been stolen from her, or maybe she was just trying to protect me, not wanting to make things worse. I wanted to rage, to throw things, to scream into the void, but there was only numbness, and beneath that, a slow, simmering shame. People always said betrayal was sharp, a knife in the back. They never talked about how heavy it was, the weight you carried afterward, the way it seeped into every corner of your life. I watched the mailbox every day, dreading new bills, terrified that there would be more secrets waiting to explode. I started locking the doors at night, not out of fear of strangers, but because my sense of safety was gone. Ava clung to me more than usual. At night, she would sneak into my bed, silent and shivering, as if afraid that I, too, might disappear in the night. It was in those quiet, vulnerable moments, when she pressed her small hand into mine, that I realized how much I'd lost, not just money or marriage, but my sense of certainty, my faith in the world as I'd known it. The days stretched on, and my devastation deepened into a cold, gnawing helplessness. But underneath, somewhere far down, I felt a flicker, a tiny, desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to survive. I just didn't know how. It was the 5th night since Mark's betrayal when something shifted. I was sitting on the edge of Ava's bed, brushing her hair in silence as she stared at her bookshelf, eyes fixed and unblinking. I could hear the crickets outside and the slow ticking of the clock in the hallway. It felt like another evening lost to sadness, just the two of us huddled together in the wreckage of our old life. But then, out of nowhere, Ava turned her head and looked straight at me, her expression strangely calm for a 12-year-old. "Mom, you don't have to worry so much," she said quietly, almost as if she were telling me a secret. "It's not over yet." The words didn't register at first. I smiled, assuming she was trying to comfort me the way children sometimes do, repeating hopeful things they've heard adults say. But Ava didn't look away. Instead, a tiny, mischievous smirk played at the corners of her mouth. "Really, Mom, I handled it." For a moment, I just stared at her, not understanding. Was she in denial? Did she not grasp how hopeless things were? I wanted to explain again that the money was gone, that her father wasn't coming back, but she shook her head and tapped her tablet with one finger. "Dad always thought he was smarter than everyone," she said softly, almost to herself. "But he left his email open on the laptop. He didn't log out of anything." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, honey?" I asked, unsure if I should be amused or alarmed. She looked up at me, her eyes suddenly older, sharper than I'd ever seen them. "I saw all his messages, Mom. The ones to her, and the ones to the bank, and—" She hesitated, then lifted her chin with a kind of quiet pride. "I took screenshots of everything. I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, disbelief, and a flicker of hope that I barely dared acknowledge. Ava, She cut me off, and I changed some passwords. She held out her tablet, showing me a file full of screenshots, emails, account statements, messages between Mark and his mistress. I scrolled through, my hands trembling. There it was in black and white, proof of his affair, the exact transactions, his plans to drain every last cent from us. The digital evidence was overwhelming. I saved copies to the cloud, Ava said, her voice steady, just in case. My little girl, the one who'd learned to ride a bike in this very backyard, who still left the hallway light on at night, was calmly explaining how she'd quietly outmaneuvered her own father. The anger and shame that had been crushing me for days suddenly shifted, replaced by awe. "How did you even know how to do all this?" I whispered. Ava shrugged. "You said never to trust a locked screen." I almost laughed, a shaky, half-crazed sound, and then I hugged her tight. "I'm proud of you, Ava," I said, meaning it with my whole heart. She squeezed me back and whispered, "We're not helpless, Mom. Not as long as we have each other." Something in me began to thaw. I saw for the first time that I wasn't alone in this disaster. My daughter wasn't just a child to be protected. She was my partner, my equal, maybe even braver than I was. That night, as Ava drifted off to sleep, her head on my shoulder, I made a silent promise to myself. I would fight for her, for our future, and for the chance to rise from this betrayal. But little did I know, Ava's calm confidence was more than just a comfort. It was the start of something bigger, the first spark of a plan that would soon turn the tables on Mark in ways I couldn't yet imagine. The next morning dawned with a strange sense of purpose. For the first time in days, I awoke with more than just dread weighing on my chest. I made breakfast for Ava and watched her move through the kitchen with a quiet focus, her usual childhood energy now replaced with something almost adult. The night before, she had told me she'd already handled it, and those words echoed in my mind as I cleaned up the dishes and tried to decide what to do next. I thought I'd need to call the bank or maybe a lawyer, but Ava was already several steps ahead. She waited until I'd poured my coffee and sat down at the table before pulling her laptop from her backpack. "Mom, there's more," she said, her voice low and measured. She opened a folder labeled Dad and clicked through screenshots, files, and audio recordings she'd quietly gathered. It turned out that Ava had noticed Mark acting strange weeks before he left. Late-night phone calls, whispered conversations in the hallway, his insistence on taking his laptop everywhere. So, on instinct, she started paying attention. She memorized his passwords, combinations he foolishly thought were clever, but were actually variations of Ava's birthday. Every night after he went to bed, she'd sneak onto his laptop, take photos of his screen, forward suspicious emails to herself, and even use an old phone of his to record parts of his calls. I listened in awe, torn between worry that she'd gone too far and pride in her resourcefulness. She showed me how she'd compiled everything: email chains between Mark and his mistress, wire transfer receipts, voice memos of him gloating about cleaning out the college fund, and screenshots of a secret bank account he'd opened under a false name. "I wanted to tell you sooner," she whispered, "but I thought maybe he'd change his mind. Or maybe I just made it all up in my head." I squeezed her hand. "You did everything right, sweetheart," I said, the words catching in my throat. I couldn't believe my 12-year-old daughter had been living with this secret, carrying the burden alone. She even confessed to having chatted with Mark on his Messenger app while pretending to be me, fishing for information, getting him to admit what he'd done, and gently probing for his next steps. "I told him that the bank flagged the transfers as suspicious," Ava explained. "He got really nervous. He said he'd fix it and that nobody would find out." My heart pounded as I realized what she was telling me. She hadn't just gathered evidence. She'd been quietly laying a trap. She'd baited him into revealing more than he intended, all while keeping her true identity hidden. The ingenuity, the stealth, the bravery it took to do all of that amazed me. "Are you angry at me?" she asked, voice wavering for the first time. "For spying?" I shook my head, tears pricking my eyes. "No, Ava. I'm angry at your father. I'm grateful you trusted me with this. She nodded solemnly. I just didn't want him to win. That day, as we reviewed the evidence together, I saw my daughter in a new light. Not only had she saved everything that could bring Mark to justice, but she'd done it with a quiet strength I could barely comprehend. We discussed what to do next, agreeing that we'd need to protect ourselves, but also make sure Mark couldn't hurt us again. Ava suggested reaching out to the bank with all the evidence, as well as consulting with a family friend who worked in cybersecurity. If he tries to move any more money, we'll know, she said. I set up alerts. I was stunned, but also filled with hope for the first time since Mark's betrayal. For days, I'd been drowning in shame and despair, but now, with Ava by my side, I felt a glimmer of control returning. We didn't just have evidence, we had a plan. And as Ava shut her laptop and smiled at me, I realized we might not be as powerless as I thought. From that moment on, our home transformed from a place of mourning into the command center for an unlikely, high-stakes mission. I watched my daughter with a mixture of awe and worry as she set about her work, her small hands moving with practiced ease across her keyboard, headphones in place, her face lit by the glow of her laptop screen. She explained her plan to me in hushed tones, as if afraid the walls themselves might be listening. Dad's not as careful as he thinks, Ava said, her voice steady. He reused the same passwords everywhere, even on his backup accounts. And he left his location services on. The revelation hit me like a bolt of lightning. Mark, in all his arrogance, had left a digital trail a mile wide. That night, after double-checking that all the doors were locked and the curtains drawn, we sat together in the living room, poring over maps, account ledgers, and social media posts. Ava had traced Mark's phone to a hotel on the other side of the city, where he was hiding out with his mistress, blissfully unaware that his daughter was tracking his every move. He keeps logging into his crypto wallet from the hotel Wi-Fi, she whispered. It's sloppy. Her tone was so clinical, so focused, that for a moment I forgot she was only 12. I realized she'd been quietly preparing for this, studying, observing, learning. She set up alerts on all our remaining accounts and flagged any login attempts from unfamiliar devices. But Ava didn't stop there. She started weaving a digital net around her father. Using the evidence she'd gathered, she sent anonymous tips to the hotel's front desk, claiming Mark was violating several company policies and possibly committing fraud. She crafted emails from a throwaway address, forwarding snippets of his bank statements and travel records to his mistress. Ava knew exactly how to stir suspicion and paranoia, ensuring that neither Mark nor his lover would feel safe or secure in their stolen little bubble. Then, with a skill I didn't know she possessed, she created a simple script to monitor Mark's online activity, alerting us every time he tried to access an account linked to our stolen money. One evening, as we watched the alerts come in, Ava grinned, her eyes shining with fierce satisfaction. He's panicking, Mom. He keeps changing passwords, but I'm always a step ahead. Sure enough, we began to receive desperate, disjointed messages from Mark, sent to my email and even Ava's old school address. Did you mess with my accounts? Why can't I access my wallet? Who's watching me? Ava leaned back in her chair and gave me a look of pure, quiet triumph. He's scared, Mom. He thinks he's being hacked. I couldn't believe it. My little girl was outsmarting the man who had shattered our family. It was poetic justice, unfolding in real time. The bank, once skeptical, became suddenly responsive when we forwarded all the evidence: emails, transaction records, location pings, and Ava's meticulous notes. They agreed to flag the suspicious transfers and began an internal investigation. It wasn't just about getting our money back. It was about showing Mark that he hadn't won, that his own carelessness and arrogance would be his undoing. Ava's trap was elegant in its simplicity. She didn't have to confront her father or resort to threats. She let the digital breadcrumbs do the work, leading him straight into a maze of suspicion and fear. Every time he tried to outmaneuver us, he found another wall, another locked door, another sign that his betrayal would not go unpunished. In the weeks that followed, the tension in our home began to shift. We were still wary, still wounded, but no longer helpless. Ava's determination gave me the strength I needed to fight for our future, to reclaim what had been stolen. We became partners in this strange new world, a mother and daughter united by pain, but also by a fierce, unbreakable love and a shared sense of purpose. Ava's digital trap had been set, and as we watched Mark flounder in his own web, I knew we were no longer the victims of his choices. For the first time since that terrible morning, I felt hope, sharp and bright, cutting through the darkness. The real test came when Ava decided it was time to set the final stage of her plan in motion. By now, she had anticipated her father's every move, his desperate attempts to hide the stolen money, his paranoia as each account mysteriously locked him out, his growing suspicion that someone was watching him. But Ava wanted more than just to scare him. She wanted him to pay for what he'd done, and for the world he'd tried to create with his mistress to crumble from the inside. She crafted her setup carefully, combining everything she'd learned. First, she created a series of anonymous emails, timed perfectly, posing as a concerned bank security agent. The emails warned Mark that his recent transactions had been flagged as fraudulent and would soon be investigated. At the same time, Ava sent a message directly to his mistress from a disguised account, hinting at Mark's secret offshore dealings and suggesting that he was planning to run off alone, abandoning her as easily as he had us. These digital breadcrumbs fanned the flames of mistrust between them, and soon the mistress began bombarding Mark with questions, accusations, and threats of her own. Ava watched with quiet satisfaction as their social media posts shifted from lovesick declarations to cryptic, angry subtweets and deleted photos. But she wasn't done yet. Using her access to Mark's email, Ava sent an urgent message to his bank, pretending to be him, and asked them to temporarily freeze the secret account, due to a security concern. It was just convincing enough to trigger a review. When Mark frantically tried to regain access, he was denied. And because Ava had saved every digital breadcrumb, every screenshot, every message, she and I were able to forward a perfectly organized dossier to the bank's fraud department, making it impossible for Mark to explain the sudden movement of funds. But the most brilliant part of Ava's plan was the bait. She sent a final, carefully worded message, again from an anonymous account, inviting Mark to a video call that would supposedly resolve everything and secure the funds. He took the bait, desperate and rattled, thinking he was finally about to regain control. Instead, the moment he logged in, he was greeted by an empty screen and a flashing message. "You took everything from us. Now you get nothing." Mark exploded. He began calling my phone and even Ava's school number, his voice rising to a fever pitch. "What did you do? Where's my money? Who's doing this to me?" But Ava just watched the phone ring, cool and calm. "Let him sweat," she said. And for the first time, I saw a quiet confidence in her, a maturity that had grown in the fire of betrayal. The setup was complete. Mark was now trapped, his accounts frozen, his mistress doubting his every word, his digital identity compromised by his own carelessness and arrogance. All he could do was flail in the web he'd spun, powerless to reverse the damage. For Ava and me, it wasn't just about revenge. It was about restoring a sense of power, reclaiming what he'd tried to steal, and proving that even in our pain, we were never truly helpless. That night, as we watched Mark's desperate voicemails pile up, Ava looked at me and grinned. "He always said he was the smartest person in the room," she whispered, "but he never even saw me." I hugged her tight, feeling for the first time in weeks that we were finally, unmistakably, turning the page. The day the phone rang and Mark's number flashed on the screen, my heart stopped. I had spent countless nights replaying everything he'd done, wondering what I would say if he ever dared to call. But when his voice finally burst through the line, it wasn't the smooth, confident man I once knew. It was a man on the edge of panic, his words tumbling out so fast they nearly tripped over each other. "What the hell did you do? Where's my money?" His voice cracked with desperation, anger, and, most satisfyingly, a hint of fear. I almost hung up right then. I wanted to scream at him, to unleash the fury that had built up inside me since the day he left us with nothing. But before I could answer, Ava reached for the phone, putting her hand over mine. "Let me," she whispered, her voice calm and strong. I handed her the phone, watching my 12-year-old daughter stare into the abyss of betrayal and stand tall. "Hi, Dad," she said, her tone so neutral it was almost chilling. "You sound upset." Mark's response was a mix of pleading and rage. "Don't play games, Ava. Did you mess with my accounts? Why can't I access anything? Who's helping you? Ava's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. You told me I was too young to understand, but I guess I figured some things out. Mark fell silent, breathing heavy on the other end, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Ava, listen to me, he finally said, lowering his voice. You don't know what you're doing. Just give me the access codes and I'll make sure you and your mom are taken care of. I promise. Ava didn't flinch. We're already taking care of ourselves. You should probably figure out what you're going to tell your friend about the offshore account. She seems pretty upset. I heard Mark gasp. He must have realized then that the chaos unraveling in his life wasn't random at all. You little, he sputtered, but Ava cut him off, her voice like ice. Don't call us again unless it's to return what you stole. Every bank and every lawyer in town has copies of what you did. The silence that followed was electric. I could picture him on the other end, sweating, red-faced, cornered in his cheap hotel room, grasping at the last threads of control. You'll regret this, he spat. But the threat rang hollow, empty. Ava calmly ended the call. My hands were shaking, but Ava was still, her face a mask of quiet triumph. For days, Mark kept trying, calling from different numbers, sending frantic emails, even showing up outside Ava's school once before the police were called and he fled. But each time, we stood firm. Each time, we had one answer: make things right or face the consequences. The power had shifted so completely that it was almost dizzying. Ava had flipped the script, forcing her father to beg and threaten in equal measure. And I saw in her a strength that made me believe we could face anything as long as we were together. The man who had shattered us was now the one left screaming into the void, powerless to undo what he'd set in motion. Ava never gloated. She just got quieter, her eyes older, as if she'd seen the world for what it was and decided she'd never let herself be fooled again. She protected us, not out of vengeance alone, but because she understood, maybe better than I ever did, that justice sometimes has to be taken into your own hands. And as Mark's rage turned to silence, I finally realized we'd survived the worst he could do. In the wake of that storm, all that was left was the calm Ava had brought us with her courage, her cleverness, and her unbreakable spirit. The fallout from Ava's digital coup didn't stop with Mark's angry calls. It bled into every corner of his carefully constructed new life, unraveling everything he'd tried to build on a foundation of lies. It started quietly at first. Whispers, tension, and unanswered texts between him and his mistress. Ava, always several moves ahead, had timed her anonymous messages perfectly. She'd sent the mistress enough clues about Mark's duplicity to make her doubt everything. Hints about hidden accounts, a screenshot here, a forwarded email there, all carefully curated to make it look as if Mark was planning to abandon her, just as he had abandoned us. The effect was immediate. The mistress's posts on social media grew cryptic, her online presence suddenly awash with angry emojis and suspicious quotes about betrayal and trust. Ava showed me, stifling a giggle as we scrolled through a feed that once flaunted vacation selfies and romantic dinners, now replaced by vague threats and bitter memes. The next blow came when the mistress confronted Mark, demanding answers about the money, about his secret plans, about why the bank was now investigating their accounts. Ava and I imagined the scene. Mark, already frantic from losing access to his funds, now ambushed by the woman he thought would be his fresh start. Their arguments became public in their tiny online circles, shouted accusations, unfollowings, and the kind of digital drama that leaves a stain impossible to scrub away. But the chaos didn't end there. The bank, armed with the evidence Ava had collected, froze all of Mark's suspicious accounts and flagged several for further legal review. He was locked out, unable to explain the sudden movements, the shadowy transfers, or why there was an entire folder of screenshots and chat logs marked with his name, sent from a concerned party. Word spread among his old friends, and whispers of fraud and theft began to circulate in the places he used to feel welcome. Even his own family, once his defenders, called me to ask what was going on. I didn't need to say much. The documents spoke for themselves. The mistress, realizing she'd been used and lied to, wasted no time in exposing her own grievances. She contacted the bank, claiming she'd been duped and asking if there was any way to recover her investment. She even reached out to me in a fit of fury and embarrassment, but I had nothing to offer her except the truth. Ava watched with solemn eyes as the last of Mark's lies came undone, one thread at a time. "He thought he could just start over," she said quietly, but he never really left the past behind. As Mark's carefully constructed double life collapsed, Ava and I watched, not as vindictive observers, but as survivors who had finally seen justice take its course. We didn't need to fight anymore. The world was doing it for us. And in the ruins of his own betrayal, Mark was left utterly alone. The people he'd manipulated turning their backs as quickly as he'd turned on us. That night, Ava and I sat together on the couch, watching the storm rage from a safe distance. For the first time since that terrible morning, I felt a sense of peace. Not because we'd won, but because the truth had a way of finding its own revenge. And as Ava snuggled against me, her head on my shoulder, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together, stronger, wiser, and unbreakable. When the dust finally began to settle, what struck me most wasn't the absence of Mark, or the awkward calls from mutual friends seeking gossip. It was the slow, steady return of hope. For weeks, Ava and I had lived with a sense of dread, expecting Mark to lash out again, or for some new disaster to come knocking. But what came instead was resolution. Unexpected, unhurried, and undeniably sweet. It started with a phone call from the bank's fraud department. The voice on the other end was different this time. No longer dismissive or skeptical, but professional, even apologetic. "We've completed our review, Ms. Carter. Based on the evidence you submitted, we've been able to freeze the fraudulent accounts. The funds intended for your daughter's college savings have been traced, and pending some formalities, will be returned to your control." For a moment, I didn't understand what I was hearing. The words seemed too good to be true. But as the reality set in, I felt a wave of relief so strong I had to sit down. Ava, sitting beside me, squeezed my hand with the steely confidence that had gotten us through. Her eyes sparkled, and she finally let herself grin, truly and deeply, for the first time since this nightmare began. "See, Mom? I told you we'd get it back." The process wasn't instant. The paperwork, the legal reviews, the forms to sign. But every day the account balance ticked closer to what it should have been. Every dollar returned a tiny victory over the man who thought he could take our future away. The police became involved as the bank's investigation spread, and soon Mark faced a mountain of consequences that went far beyond our little family drama. He was forced to answer for his theft and deception in ways that didn't just affect us, but also the people who'd enabled or ignored his behavior. Ava and I sat in on video calls with the authorities, her evidence at the center of every conversation. I watched my daughter become something more than a victim or even a hero. She was a witness to the truth, and her clarity made grown men pause and listen. In the weeks that followed, the whispers about us changed too. People who'd once pitied us now looked at us with a kind of respect, sometimes even awe. Friends reached out with real concern instead of empty platitudes, offering help or simply wanting to hear the whole story. Some apologized for doubting me, for believing Mark's stories instead of trusting the woman and the child he'd left behind. But the greatest reward wasn't the returned money or the restored reputation. It was seeing Ava stand tall, her innocence tempered by hard-won wisdom, her sense of justice sharper than ever. She was still a child. She still watched cartoons and doodled in the margins of her notebooks, but there was a new steadiness in her that even her teachers noticed. "You must be so proud of her," one told me. And I was. I was proud of her courage, her ingenuity, her refusal to accept defeat. And in the quiet moments, when the world stopped spinning quite so fast, I felt proud of myself too. I hadn't just survived Mark's betrayal. With Ava, I'd reclaimed what was ours, and found a strength I never knew I had. We celebrated in small ways. A night out for pizza, a new plant for the living room, Ava's dream sneakers bought without guilt or fear. The world hadn't suddenly become fair, but we'd won a small, hard-fought justice. We were no longer powerless. We were no longer afraid. After the whirlwind months of shock, despair, and hard-fought triumph, life gradually began to take on a new shape, a shape defined not by the absence of Mark, but by the presence of resilience, healing, and hope between Ava and me. The ordeal had cost us dearly in ways no amount of returned money could ever fully mend. But it also gave us something we never expected: a bond forged in fire and a deeper understanding of our own strength. I watched Ava reclaim her childhood little by little, laughter returning to her voice as the constant worry faded. We started a new tradition: Sunday night movie marathons with popcorn and blankets on the living room floor. Each night, I tucked her in with a renewed sense of gratitude, not just for the college fund restored or the justice we'd earned, but for the young woman I saw emerging from this storm. I realized that my greatest lesson hadn't come from the betrayal itself, but from watching Ava stand up to it with more grace and clarity than most adults could ever muster. There were still hard days. Sometimes, out of nowhere, a wave of anger or sadness would sweep over me when a bill arrived with Mark's name on it, or I'd pass a familiar restaurant that used to be ours. But those moments became fewer and less sharp. The truth was, Mark's betrayal had set us free. We no longer lived in a world defined by his moods or secrets. Instead, we rebuilt our own, step by step. The community rallied around us, too. Some offered help, others simply offered a listening ear, and more than a few looked to Ava as a quiet role model. I saw her help friends with their own problems, offering the same determined calm she'd shown me. At school, she volunteered for the tech club, quickly becoming the go-to person when anything needed troubleshooting. The teachers called her unflappable, a word I never would have imagined for my little girl before all this. As for me, I found myself more open to new experiences, less afraid of risk, and far more willing to speak up for what mattered. Ava and I began volunteering at a local shelter, determined to use some of what we'd regained to help others. We even opened a small savings account together, not as a replacement for what was lost, but as a symbol of the future we were building with open eyes. If there was a moral to our story, it wasn't just about vengeance or even justice. It was about the power we each hold to shape our fate, even when it feels like the world has been pulled out from under us. Ava taught me that we are never as helpless as we think, and that even the worst betrayals can become the soil from which something beautiful grows. One evening, months after Mark's departure, Ava curled up next to me, her head on my shoulder, and whispered, "I'm glad we have each other, Mom, no matter what." I kissed her forehead, a lump in my throat, and realized that was all I truly needed. In the end, our family wasn't defined by who left, but by who stayed and how we chose to write our own story together, one day at a time.